So I think that, like, the first thing to really talk about is that often when we are looking at creating, right? I mean, that's really the question, and that's what this discussion is about, is creating. Like, how we look at people and we go, okay, well, how did they do what they did? You know? And in our culture, there's often a perception of, like, I just have to figure out the right formula. And I think there's certainly truth to that. But here's the truth that very few of us are actually told, and it goes back to what I was teaching a little bit this morning and this week, is that the first thing is you actually have to be clear on what you want. And it seems like, oh, well, yeah, I'm pretty clear on what I want. But most of us, I don't know what your childhood was like, but most of the time we are not taught how to actually, like, dream well. We're not actually taught how to be, like, expansive in our thinking. We're taught more like, here's the boundary of what you're allowed to have or what's acceptable. And even if it's not said consciously, it's said in subtle ways. So, for example, when I grew up in a very, like, super low income household. So there was a judgment about money because there was never enough money. And rich people or wealthy people were always assholes. Like, it was always that my mom was a waitress. She worked for a very wealthy Greek man. And it was like, you have to, like, what's the word? Like, contort yourself so that this person takes care of you or likes you, but he's really just an asshole. So the reason that I share that is there's subtle ways that those subconscious beliefs come in and they limit us. So the first thing that, is actually really important is to get super clear on what you want. And most of us are actually creating out of what we don't want, which is an okay place to start. But I think what's also helpful today is to talk a little bit about, like, the law of vibration or law of manifestation. So if you choose, after this time together, if you want, you can look at that, like, what do I really want, and most of the time what comes in is there'll be limiting thoughts of, am I allowed to have that? Who am I to think that way? But the other thing that comes in is the how. Well, that's never going to happen. Or how am I going to make that happen? Right? So in the beginning of anything, it's actually the power of saying, here's the clarity of what I want and desire. And to actually almost leave, like, a vortex. For now, we're gonna talk a little bit about the how to, but of going from here I am and here's what I want to create or have in my life. And most of the time the mind is like, well, I need to figure out all the steps to do that, or I'm not going to take a step.
Right.
And we can't see it from where we are. So the most important thing to actually do is actually really get clear on what you want. And if you need to start with what I don't want, that's okay. So, for example, when I had a corporate career and I was moving out of corporate, and the first thing is, like, I don't want to work for people that treat other people poorly. That's where I had to start. And I think even, as we created Balanced Life Yoga, I was like, I don't want to have a space where people feel judged. Because sometimes in the yoga community, it can actually be a little bit judgy. Or cliquey. So then I was like, okay, well, I don't want those things. What do I want? I want to create a space where people feel welcome. I want to feel safe to be myself, and I want other people to feel safe to be themselves. I want to work with people that have the same values as me, for example. And this piece of actually really getting clear on what, like, you can start with what you don't want to what you do want. It comes from, for me anyways, like it comes from something like in here. It's here, but it's also here. And I remember is that when I first started the Balanced Life Yoga, you know, this is like 16 years ago, someone said to me, it was a male business owner, and he said, women will never get along. I mean, you can see his misogyny, right? Like you can see the bias, but why I share this is, I mean, I didn't share with him that this was my vision, but it was like, he was a private client of mine, actually. So he was coming to work with me for anxiety and things like that. And at the time, I was really growing my team, you know, and I was very clear on who I wanted in my team. And he was saying, it was very sweet, can I give you some business advice? And it was like, well, I'm not really interested. But, you know, he was a 60-year-old white guy who thought he knew everything. So I was like, okay. And he said, I just want you to know that in my years of working, having my own business for the last 40 years, women will not report to women, and women won't work well together.
That's not true.
No, it's not true at all. So, but the thing was, I was like, that's your experience, and that's your judgment and your mindset and your limitations, and that's fine. But I'm very clear on what I'm here to do. And the reason I share that is that when you say to yourself, this is what I want, and it's almost like you don't have to necessarily declare it, but you are declaring something internally. You're like, I'm seizing this. It's also to be so clear in that even when the peanut gallery or the experts or whomever, your family, I don't know, comes in and says, that's silly, or that's stupid, or that's never going to happen, or what are you thinking, or that's not safe, right? That's a common one in our culture. It's to actually say, thanks very much, but I'm clear on what I'm doing here. And this is like, you know, it actually takes a bit of fortitude in ourselves to be like, this is what I know to be true. And I think it's also why it's important to actually have some like-minded people in your life. And to also be mindful. I mean, I wasn't sharing with that person, this is my vision and this is what I want to do, but he could see, like, he was like, something's different about her. And I don't mean that in like an egotistical way, but it was like I had a team and everybody was happy. And he was like, what's going on here? Like, why is your team happy? Because my team's not happy. So what's going on? And instead of, in that moment, him saying, you know, I was like 30 something at the time, you know, what do you have going on here? He wanted to make me wrong because he couldn't figure out what was going on in him. And that's cool, you know. So this is
coming from a mindset, though, of he was previous to his businesses, he was in the army, like he was like the Canadian Forces, and he was very regimented in, like, people have to report to him, not in chain of command.
Exactly. And I've never, you know, we've never been like that in any of our situations or, you know, businesses or anything. So anyways, the reason that I share that story is that so often when we are creating and we're looking at somebody and we're going, wow, how did they do that? Is that very few people actually really talk about this. And it's actually to really have a clear vision of what you want. And, you know, I'm not saying that at that time I had a clear vision of every aspect of what I wanted. And I'm going to give you the second part of this. It was more like, I know what I want my life to feel like. And I know that for me, it was also like, I know what I want to contribute, if I think is the best word that I can find. So I knew what I wanted my life to feel like. And I had come out of corporate. I'm very grateful for my time in corporate, but where I didn't like the feelings of the environment. I didn't like the way people were being treated. I didn't like the way that I was treated. I didn't like that. And so much of what we're making decisions on in our life is that it's a little bit how, we're raised, but it's also normalized in our culture is we're saying, am I okay? Is this 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 okay? And I still do it at times too, where I'm like, oh, that person said something. Am I okay? And it's like, instead of saying, how do I actually want to feel? How do I want to feel? And not to say that I'm not going to have feelings, the whole variety of feelings, but really like, what do you want the tone of your life to look like?